Good morning, Coalition. It's great to see everybody this morning. And it's wonderful to have Mary Bethel with us to give us a little bit of her history. But first of all, Allison is going to give us a quick update on a couple of items.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and happy Friday and happy October. Wow, time is flying. I have a ton of updates to share with you today, but I will summarize them in a little brief overview. The first thing I would like to bring to your attention is the Caregiver and Patient Engagement Work Group had an excellent inaugural forum on Tuesday. If you were unable to attend, that's a-okay because it is now on our resource library on the website. So you click the resources page and it'll pop up here for you to view that forum. So check that out. Also, our past clinical practice forums are also located in this resource library, so feel free to utilize that. Upcoming events, speaking of caregiver forums, they're doing a second forum again on Thursday, October 21st. This is going to feature a movie brought to you by Mark Hensley and the Randolph Hospice. So please view this in your member email coming out today. And then another forum is the Clinical Practice Forum on Friday, October 22nd. I'll go ahead and link these flyers in the chat for you. Feel free to view the flyer to register. And then last but not least, Mary will talk about the Coalition on Aging during her interview, but the Coalition on Aging is doing a forum called Essential Jobs and Essential Care. It's a brown bag lunch. So I will put the link in the chat to register for that as well. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I will address them as soon as I can. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Allison. And I guess I have to say to everyone that this is going to be Allison's last Friday, actually her last day with us as a paid administrator. She hopefully will join us as a coalition member in the future, but if anyone wants to stay around for a minute or two at 9 o'clock and give Allison a couple of parting words, feel free to do that. So we'll change our schedule just slightly today in recognition of that. But anyway, I won't. She didn't want me to say very much, so I'm not going to. All right. Well, Mary, wonderful to see you and wonderful to have you. You're not in Banff. You're here in Raleigh, but you have a great background there in Lake Louise and in Banff, and you did visit Canada recently, so yeah, I don't think you got that far though, did you?
No, this trip we did Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. So beautiful area, highly recommended.
Yeah, great. So Mary, you grew up in Bertie, and I bet there's some people that don't even know where Bertie County is in North Carolina, but tell us about what it was like when you grew up. You lived on a farm and you did all kinds of interesting things.
Yeah, Bertie County is in the northeastern part of the state. I like to tell people it's about halfway between Rocky Mount and Elizabeth City. Yeah, it is unfortunately one of the areas in the state that when a lot of rural areas started losing population, I think it was the first county in the state that did lose rural population. I did grow up on a farm. We raised crops, tobaccos, peanuts, soybeans. We also at various times had cows and hogs and things like that. We didn't have the big hog barns and cow lots like you have now. We had pastures, so we were into organic farming before we knew what organic farming was. But I basically I was a farm worker basically until my junior year in college, when in the summers when I was in college. But when I was growing up, I mean, my whole family, we worked the farm, and it was a very mature experience. You learn the value of hard work and keep it on and being adaptive and flexible in what you do. So it was a great childhood, and certainly I think a lot of the qualities and maybe principles I have in life now resulted from my upbringing in northeastern North Carolina.
Yeah, and so you subsequently went to NC State and got a degree in, I think you called it therapeutic recreation?
Right, it is, and they don't even have a degree anymore, but basically I ended up working for a rehab center, a center that had persons with mental and emotional disabilities, and then they hired me after I graduated from college, so I was very happy about that. But it's basically, I found out real early, even though I love my job, is that it was the type of thing where you worked at nights and weekends. And when you're 21, 22 years old, you know, you think there's more to life than working on weekends. So, but anyway, my husband and I got married, and we ended up in Northern Virginia. And even though I'm from North Carolina, we lived in Northern Virginia about 6 years, and I worked for County Department of Social Services there. I didn't have a degree in social work, but I ended up being a social worker. So it was a lot of, I'm sorry, Karen. So it ended up being a lot of trial and error. But that I think that, and the fact that my mother had always been one of these folks that kind of took the lead on helping to take care of a lot of older persons and persons with disabilities in our community growing up. And I would do lots of visits with her. I would do, you know, a lot of older people were just a very integral part of my life. Is kind of how I got into aging. And like I say, when I was in social services, I worked at an older adult and persons with disability population that I work with. So that's how I got into it.
So you kind of were mentored into it by just watching other people, including your mother, who
Exactly.
really took an interest in older people. So
Yep. And coming from a rural area, you took care of your own pretty much. You know, we didn't have a lot of facilities or a lot of other resources. So it was up to the community to take care of folks. And that's kind of what we did, you know.
so you found yourself up in Northern Virginia. Your husband had a job with the federal government.
No,
And
he had a job, actually, a county government. He
county
worked
government.
for county, yeah.
Gotcha. But then at some point you said, I want to go back to North Carolina. Tell us that story about how you walked
Yeah.
in.
No, nobody's ever gotten a job like I got, and I don't highly recommend it, but it worked for me. So we did decide we wanted to move back to North Carolina, and you know, most of our friends were down here, and we wanted to be where our friends were. So I walked in off the street one day to the State Division of Aging, as it was called that back then, and said, you know, I'm moving back to North Carolina. I like old folks. Do you have any jobs? And they hired me. I think it seemed like an eternity for them to get everything processed, but I think it was only 2 months. And they ended up hiring me. So I stayed there for the next 30 years. So it was a great experience. It was a wonderful agency to work for. A lot of camaraderie, and we felt like we were doing good stuff. So it was a very, very rewarding experience.
Well, I think you were doing good stuff. You were engaged in being, as you called it, an ombudsman. Did you call it that back then?
Yeah, we did. I was probably I was kind of the first ombudsman that actually did ombudsman functions for long-term care. Then I had a series of other jobs. I mean, we're a small agency back then. You did pretty much anything that's required. So I did that. I did a lot of training. I did a lot of working with community-based services. A lot of working with people out in the field, out in the state, which, I mean, at one point I could tell you every little small looking cranny in North Carolina and what county it was in, but you know, my memory is not so good anymore, but it was the type of thing where you really learn the state and you learn the people, and you know, it was a nice fit. I enjoyed it. And then the last 13 years of the position there, I worked a lot for our advocacy efforts, as well as health and health promotion and caregiving type things, and began to do some work for legislature, Senior Tar Heel Legislature, Governor's Advisory Council on Aging, things like that. I think the position was called Special Assistant to the Director or something like that, but it was, you know, it was a good experience. Kind of got me on my advocacy trail.
Yeah, I was going to say that kind of cut your teeth in advocacy. and you spent the last 13 years essentially doing that kind of stuff. So what led you to then finish that career and start your second of 3 careers?
Yeah. Well, and quite frankly, it was a personal thing. My husband was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is cancer of the plasma cells of the bone marrow. And at that point, you know, they made a lot of progress in it this day and time. But at that point, you know, we weren't sure what the future held. And we had 2 kids in college. So I, you know, realized that I could take state retirement as well as get another job and be more financially secure. So it's just, you know, this practical things that we all do to make decisions that influence our families. But also I knew the ARP office and the reputation they had. I was in graduate school with their director, and, you know, just had lots of connections with the programs. And we worked very closely with ARP when I was at the Division of Aging, and, you know, a lot of good collaborative work came out of there. So I went there as associate state director for advocacy, along with a guy named Bill Wilson, who was a seasoned politician and lobbyist. And I learned a lot from him. He used to work for NCAE in North Carolina for many years. And I think we were a fairly decent advocacy team.
No, I
and
think
work with Steve and folks like that. So
yeah, there's Steve. So pretty quickly you became a caregiver yourself in a lot of ways. Tell us about what that meant to be both advocating for caregiving and for aging issues, and then suddenly finding yourself being, you know, caring for a husband that had cancer.
yeah, and actually we were very lucky. I mean, he had lots and lots of chemo, but he did pretty well. But at the same time, you know, trying to navigate personally with a husband, my mother had dementia in Bertie County, and in many situations, I was the weekend caregiver. I would leave Raleigh or Fuquay-Varina, where we live. I would leave at 4:30 in the morning to get there to relieve the 7 o'clock shift. So we were very lucky. We had 4 women, local women, that coordinated the care. But when they needed a break, and when, particularly on weekends, when things didn't work out, my sister and I were the caregivers. So, and this went on, I mean, my mom had significant dementia for 8 years, but 4 years of home care, around the clock home care. And for 4 years, pretty much, I was, you know, my sister and I were the caregivers as needed. We used to have this little thing that we had roles we played. I mean, we had wonderful caregivers, but sometimes you just need to make hard decisions and talk to them about difficult stuff. So my sister would always lay the foundation, and me being the sister that was not there would be the hammer in a nice way. So, you know, you work out these roles of how you navigate caregiving, and you know, had great respect for the caregivers. They I think liked us too. And you know, it's funny, I mean, we talk about caregiving and how challenging it is in for everybody. We got my mother's 4 caregivers. A woman in our community had them before. I called her daughter the day her mom died to say, you know, we're to the point we've got to have caregivers for my mom. I apologize for calling you on this date. And she says, that's okay. You're the 3rd call I've had. So anyway, the day my mom died, 4 years later, I had 2 or 3 calls from people also looking for caregivers too. So
Wow.
it's, you know, and that's the informal network. Nothing was ever advertised. Nothing was ever, you know, put on any type of advertisement or anything. It was all word of mouth and who you knew and making those connections. And I think that's still, in many cases, the way it's done in particularly a lot of rural communities to this day.
All word of mouth. Interesting.
But we would do anything to keep those caregivers happy. You know, you did what you needed to do. If they need to get off in the afternoon on a Wednesday, you arranged your schedule so that somebody was there for them to be off. So.
I don't think that's changed today, has it?
I don't think so. I mean, families do what families need to do, to make it work. So anyway, I spent 10 years at ARP and was uh, really excited about that. And it was a good ride. I enjoyed that too.
So then you started the third career, and tell us
Yeah.
about that.
Well, ARP is known for its reorganization. Steve can tell you about that. In 2015, they were going to do another reorganization, and I just decided I didn't have another reorganization in me. So I made the decision to retire. And my husband had already retired, and he was really saying, we need to. I want to travel. I want to do some things. So I had a little added influence there. So I retired in 2015. A few months after that, I became basically director of or actually president of the Coalition on Aging. At that point, we were not an organization. We didn't, we were a loose knit organization, but we didn't, and we actually had some bylaws, but they were loosey goosey. The group had, under Bill Lamb, who preceded me as president, he had a lot of vision, and his thought is that we all needed to work together and to bring people around the table in order to try to move this needle on aging issues. And certainly my whole work life had been about collaboration and coordination with folks, and that you can get some things done as an individual agency or an individual person, but you can accomplish so much more if people work together and you have partnerships and people aren't so hyped up about who's going to get all the credit, that type of thing. So I think there were many of us at that point, those of us who were kind of later in our careers, that had seen that a lot of the initiatives that had momentum over the years were kind of waning a little bit. We weren't getting resources into aging services and programs like we used to. It was real hard to get on the radar, and that we felt that if we were truly to make a difference in North Carolina, the coalition was had a prime opportunity to take a leadership in that. Everybody knows the demographics of aging. I don't have to tell you about that, but by 2025, it's estimated that 1 in 5 people in North Carolina is going to be over the age of 65. And also by 2025, 98 of the 100 counties are expected to have more people over the age of, I think it's 60, over 60 than it is under 18. So, the demographics certainly speak to that. And one of the things that we also, not only is it the right thing to do to be able to support older people and their families, but it has great financial implications for our state budget. You cannot, you can't provide enough services. You can't build enough nursing homes. You can't put enough public funds into it if we don't have a plan for what needs to be done as we move forward with an increased older population.
Yeah. So you, I don't know if you recruited her, but you certainly had a lot to do with bringing a lady that's on the call here, Heather, into the Coalition on Aging. And she said, she had something in the chat here. She said, I remember traveling with Mary to Tarboro for disaster response after Hurricane Floyd and other duties as assigned.
Yeah, Heather and I had the opportunity to work at the Division of Age and Adult Services, where Heather worked for, I think, 18 years, Heather, I think. And, I knew Heather's work, and we were, but that time, the coalition started off as a very grassroots thing. We didn't have any money. So our first effort was membership dues and sponsorship of an annual meeting and things like that. And basically I was doing pretty much stuff, not quite pro bono, but pretty close, just because I thought it needed to be done. But we put a lot of focus on trying to be financially viable, and we came up with a financial sustainability plan for how we could, think we could move forward on hiring somebody. So we cropped together enough funds and were able to first hired Allison Crossman, and Costanza, so not Heather, Allison, and it just wasn't her cup of tea. She was young, and she was there 6 months, and we really felt like we needed somebody who was a seasoned veteran, so we went after Heather, and it was the best decision the whole board made. So she's done a marvelous job.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, there's another question here. How can we engage and get support from aging advocates in North Carolina to actively support family caregivers across the lifespan?
Well, I think family caregivers has been high on the agenda for a long time, and I know some people get frustrated that they don't see the coalition right now doing more on caregiving. Our plans for a caregiver support working group that's going to be done. I think, like with anything, when you're trying to push an advocacy agenda, you kind of have to go with the flow about what things get to have a little bit of traction right now. We tried 2-3 years ago to actually get a caregiving task force established through the General Assembly, and did not have, we couldn't get the first base on it. We actually got a hearing in one committee. It did pass that committee, and then it got sent to Rules Committee, where it just dies. There wasn't the wherewithal for the General Assembly to do anything with caregiving. Mm-hmm. But I think Heather's got a lot of plans for things that we can do in this area. It is certainly one of the most critical things that we can do. But the issue we have, and a lot of young grassroots organizations have, is you have limited resources, you have limited staff capacity. Heather is a staff person of one. And you have to be strategic in what you undertake and when you undertake it. And you can't take on everything. So after we were not successful in getting the caregiver task force established through legislation, conversations with the department about it just did not go anywhere either. And quite frankly, even pre-COVID, there were other things on the agenda for the department, Medicaid transformation, opioid crisis, things like that. So, and that's one of the reasons that I think we feel real strongly that we needed a coalition on aging, because aging always kind of fell by the wayside because you always had these other crises. And our contention is that, well, we've got a crisis in the making. If we don't address it, it's going to bite us in the rear end. So, but you have to kind of go with those. You have to be conscious of your political environment as well as the other factors that are going on around you when you, and think about who you can bring on board to be supportive also of what you're doing at the time. So, one of the hot issues right now is the direct care workforce issue. The issue about adult daycare funding. I mean, we have adult daycare centers closing left and right in North Carolina, and had tried for 20 years to change the way funding came to adult daycares, because the funding has been stagnant for, what is it, Heather, 15 years, 20 years, something. And it was becoming a non-option in most communities in North Carolina because they couldn't financially sustain it. So that became a top priority. It's kind of like lots of times the squeaky wheel gets the oil, or the crisis of the moment is where you've got to focus on. So being with limited resources and staffing, you have to kind of address those crisis things, even though there are other things you want to get to. But you've got to be able to, if you're going to have any success in doing something, you've got to have some focused effort on some things. Yeah. Sometimes.
Absolutely.
At least that's my opinion.
Well, I think you gave us a bit of advocacy 101 there. So, and it's really challenging to address all those issues. So John Toma asked a question. He said, if you were back at AARP or even in the Division of Aging, what would your program priority be? And I think I'm going to put some words in John's mouth here. I think he's basically saying, if you had a wish, what would it be to focus on?
If I had a wish, I would want every community, every resident of North Carolina, older adult and their family, to have options about what what is available for their care, as well as for things that can help them maximize and have a positive aging experience. You know, where you live in North Carolina, you see services at different levels and opportunities at different levels. So, you know, I mean, that's like the global wish, is to make sure that people had options and choices and opportunities in order to be their best selves. I mean, that sounds real hokey, but that's kind of, you know, the way it is that, and you want to support families. I mean, families are the lion's share of who's taking care of folks. So I think that while we put out the fires, if we have the resources, we need to also focus on some of those things that have long-term sequential consequences too, and can impact lots and lots of folks. But I think right now, unfortunately, I think we're still in the stage of where we're putting out the fires, and I know that's frustrating for folks, but you have to sometimes go out to that low-hanging fruit, as well as you know, things that are demanding attention. And I mean, this is just another thing from advocacy from my standpoint. To bring people on board to advocacy and sustain them, you've got to have some victories along the way. So sometimes you do go after things that are more attainable, because it keeps people engaged when they can see some progress being made. Because if you're out there beating your head up against the wall all the time and you don't see any changes, it's very frustrating for folks.
That's a great observation, Mary. It is important to have some victories, and I hope you'll see that this lady right here is one of your victories. Back 10 years ago or so, you recruited us to AARP when you were with AARP, and then subsequently Catherine got tapped to be the AARP state president,
and some
I believe
days
in
I
karma
thank you,
and
then there's
things
the
happening. I can imagine. But you know, I think sometimes things just happen for a reason. So when I was the ARP had a meeting at Washington Duke Inn back in, I want to say, like 2013, 2014. And David and Catherine and I just happened to run into each other in the lobby. And they wanted to know what was going on. So I talked to them about the meeting and talked to them the fact that a lot of what we did was dependent on very engaged volunteers, and that were they interested in being involved. And so that was one of those happenstance meetings, like walking in off the street, asking if they had a job.
Well, that was December, and she had us in volunteer training by January and at the legislature by February. So no grass grows under Mary's feet when she gets on a mission. And so we remember that very, very well.
Absolutely.
I think it was a pretty good move on my part.
I think so some days.
You are a very compelling advocate.
So, go ahead.
Well, there's just one last point here, and this is from Charlotte. She said, Mary, thank you for sharing your story, experience, expertise with us this morning. How do we sell that the care you are talking about benefits not only the aging, but our workforce and economy, so that all can see the benefits regardless of who we are? And that's probably going to be our last question, but
I think we have to get people to tell their stories. And I think we also have to come at things like this, as like caregiving and things like that. We have to come at it not only from the standpoint of it's the right thing to do, but also why it's a pocketbook issue in North Carolina, why it keeps people in the labor force, why if we don't address this, we're going to have a shortage of skilled, mature workers and things. So I think you have to look at ways you can engage non-traditional actors in the process. For instance, we've always talked about Chamber of Commerce need to be involved. You know, you need to get employers involved. You need to get folks that may not be the typical folks you interact with on a day-to-day basis, but if they're impacted in a way that resonates with them, then you need to, that's part of your storytelling about how you go about doing it. And, you know, messaging is so important. And it's important to have champions. Is, you know, in anything that you do, you try to identify people that can help to carry your message, but also to identify people that others will listen to. And whether it's that informal influence or whether it's you know, recognized influence because of the statue or whatever. So I think what y'all goes to say is that there needs to be a strategy in how you go about doing things. You know, not many things happen by happenstance. Generally, there is a you know, a deliberate effort made along the way by somebody or something that can be a defining point in whether or not something gets developed or done.
You're absolutely right. So, well, thank you so much, Mary. And John Toma reminds us that you were one of the recipients of the Pioneer Award here recently in the Coalition on Aging. And you've also, I mean, your list of awards is prolific. The Order of the Longleaf Pine from the governor, and on and on and on. But you are an icon, Mary, and you're
I think it's
very,
another way of saying old war horse.
yeah, well, you know, call it what you will, but you have influenced a huge number of people in the state, and you are much appreciated. So thank you for this.
Thanks.
So I know we're a little bit late, but if anyone wants, and you know, if you have to leave, understand, but if anyone wants to also share something with Allison as she is heading off, feel free to do that, and we'll just stay on for, what does Jessica have there?
We love
We
you.
love you, Allison. Yeah. So
I'll tell you a funny story so the Coalition on Aging had our annual meeting on Friday, and I was helping with registration, and Allison comes in, and I'm standing behind the desk and she's standing on the other side, and she says, well, I'm Allison Crossman. I said, well, I'm Mary Bethel. We've never met. And we didn't recognize it. We had masks on and we didn't recognize each other. So
she was like, how can I help you? I'm like, I'm Allison. And she's like, okay, I'm Mary. And I'm like, well, I know, but.
So anyway, it was funny.
but, yeah.
Strange world.
You know, I will say the old war horses like me, it is one of the most rewarding things when you look back on it is to have young folks like Allison coming up the pike. I mean, that, and the energy, enthusiasm, and just the whole attitude about doing the right thing and in it for the right reason there's nothing more rewarding than that, I don't think, than to see young folks that are following suit. So Allison, congratulations, and we'll miss you.
Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll second that, Mary. Allison has certainly helped me navigate the technology and how to access the website and getting the login and password fix and all those things. So very much appreciated, Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to wish you well, health and prosperity and peace wherever your next journey takes you. And just want to thank you so much for all that you've done.
We're not going to let her go very far. We've already told her she needs to join the coalition. She's going to be continuing on, and aging is her thing. So, and serious illness. So we can't let her wander very, very far away. And I think some of you can see our Jessica on the site with us today. She has been Allison's compatriot in crime behind the scenes, and she has graciously agreed to help us during this interim to keep the wheels on the bus, so to speak.
I just have to say, with this job, I wear many hats, but one of my favorite hats was being a quote unquote member manager, and all of you are my favorite people on this earth, and I will miss you. So please stay in contact and continue your great work, and I look forward to watching behind the scenes. So thank you.
Well, Allison, if you're going to stay with us as a member of the coalition, I want to invite you wholeheartedly to join our work group.
It'll be hard to choose one. Thank you for the invitation.
And I want to thank you for the personalized care that you give with your heart. Not only the service, it's with the technical of the website and all that, but you give wholeheartedly. So our group is wholehearted. You fit right in.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, I got to meet Allison last week at the Coalition on Aging meeting, and I was doing a lot of recruiting for our group. So the other work groups are going to have a hard time with our we're a pretty passionate group. It's going to be hard to overcome a bunch of caregivers getting on someone to come along with us. But Allison, as I mentioned last week,